Breaking news. Your dream life isn't going to happen because you made a vision board. You're gonna need goals, grit, and some woo-woo shit. This podcast is about getting clarity on what you want, having the grit to do the actual work, and most importantly, constantly training your brain to be your bitch. Ready to be inspired? Here is your host, best-selling author, Una Duncan.
All right, Dayna Abraham, I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you so much for being on the show.
I am so excited to be here.
Well, dude, I have been reading your book and I've had so many moments of being so emotionally impacted by it because, as you know, I've gone through a lot of these struggles in my family, and also moments of being like, oh, this is so smart. Everyone needs to read this book. And I'm actually not even talking about parenting. I feel like it's a great general personal development book. And I kind of want to go into that a little bit with you later, but can we start out by you telling the story that you start the book off with when you were racing to the school to pick up your kid again? Can you tell that story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was 9 months pregnant and I got a call from school that my son was having yet another meltdown. And at this point, my son it was a regular thing. And so I raced to the school and I got there. And there was just a sea of people. It was the police, it was the counselors, it was the principal, it was the teachers, it was the gym teacher. I mean, it was literally, I think, almost the entire staff, just like as a receiving line as I walked into the door. And they all were just kind of like shrugging their shoulders and staring at me. And the principal grabs me, ushers me through the office, and I see my son. And he's in a glassed-in room. He's banging on the glass. He's, hitting the chairs, and he's screaming, and they won't let me talk to him. They won't let me address him. They usher me right past him. They sit me down in the principal's office. And there is a policeman beside me. And the principal looked at me and she said, Miss Abraham, you have two choices. You can either take your son home and don't bring him back until you figure out what's wrong with him, or you can let this gentleman take him into custody. Like it was pretty devastating to hear. And what was even worse is that all of the professionals, all the teachers, the therapist, everyone that was there was just like, it came out of nowhere. We have no idea where this came from. And yet it was a daily occurrence. By this point, he was kicked out of preschool. He was in trouble in kindergarten and trouble in first grade. And this was second grade. So he was only 7 years old. And this was happening to us. And he had been kicked out of school more days than he was in school at this point.
Oh my gosh. I mean, there's so many parts of that story that are so heartbreaking. And at this point, you weren't a parenting expert or anything at this point. You were just a mom trying to make it through a horrible time.
I thought I knew what I was doing. I mean, before I became a parent. So I was raised in a family with a bipolar brother. So I always had to kind of weather the storms, and I always had to figure out how to get through really difficult things. And then when I became a teacher, I was a national board certified teacher, inner city Chicago, and my favorite kids were the tough kids. So I felt like when I became a parent that someone like Ed McMahon was just going to show up at my doorstep with this big check and say, world's best parent.
I think we all have that fantasy, no matter what our background is.
I'm gonna win this thing. Like I've got this figured out. But instead I spent the whole first 7 years just feeling like an absolute failure as a parent.
Yeah. Okay. Your bio says that you help people find peace and meet their children where they're at when conventional parenting tools have failed them. Where do you think conventional parenting tools might be failing us?
Oh, I think they're failing us in so many places. I think that there's a couple places. One is that traditional parenting advice suggests that you're either doing it all wrong, and that's why it's not working, or something must be wrong with your kid. And that it's this one size fits all approach. And if you just did it exactly like we told you to, then it would work.
Right.
And that is just going about it the wrong way, because all of us are so incredibly unique. Our children are unique. Our backgrounds are unique. The other thing that it does is traditional parenting advice tells you that you need someone else to guide the way. And it completely dismisses all the hard-won knowledge you have on your own children and on yourself. And it makes you feel like you somehow have to get this PhD in parenting, or you have to follow all the expert advice, or you'll never figure it out. And I think it leaves parents feeling incredibly overwhelmed, stressed out, blaming themselves, shameful of what's going on, guilty that they can't figure it out, and then also kind of resentful of their kids, that their kid isn't like everybody else.
And so disempowered. I actually really love that you said that, because it reminds me of, some trainers and fitness programs that I see online that are very much the same. Like, if you're not getting results, is you're doing it all wrong, or there's something wrong with you. The only way to fix it is to follow me, do everything that I say. And it is so shame-inducing, so disempowering, such bullshit, and also completely makes people distrust their own sense of themselves and their body. And so it's the same thing. I'm just drawing the parallel from my own world. And it's funny, at one point in your journey, you said, we tried everything from things that aligned with my core values to things that I was completely against, but willing to try. And it speaks to how much this can shake you, that you become so untethered in your deepest beliefs as a parent, which is exactly what you're saying there. And I'm wondering, I know from, personal experience in my brief experience in working with you, and also in reading this book, that first step for you is helping the parent come back to themselves. Can you talk a little bit more about why that's so important? Because parents do come into this just with no sense of themselves, no grounding, no just anyone, please fix me, fix my child, everything's wrong.
Yeah. And I think a lot of modern day parenting advice is about connecting with the kid and validating their emotions and creating emotional regulation tools and creating growth mindset in your children. And so it talks about skills and it talks about teaching our kids. But if we ourselves, as the parent, are shaken, don't feel safe emotionally or physically, if we don't understand our own body, if we don't understand our own, what makes us feel safe, what triggers us, what upsets us, if we don't understand those types of things, how are we ever going to be there to help our kids? And then so again, back to that blame, we're blamed for not being able to follow through, for not being able to be consistent, for not, when it's like, wait a second, nobody's actually helping me figure out me so that I can be the one who can weather any storm for my kid.
And who could be able to follow through. I mean, growth mindset, all like skills, that sounds great. But yes, that's right. If you're not in a place to implement, if you're scared, if you are exhausted, you're not going to be able to. So I love that you really start with the parent.
Yeah. And I know that you teach this, and this is a big piece that you talk about, is your thoughts and the effect that your thoughts have on your actions, which will have a huge effect on your results. And so how often are parents not being taught how to shift their thoughts? And so you're going into a situation resentful. You're going into a situation catastrophizing, or thinking always and never, or thinking that in absolutes. And so you can only see the negatives. And you're only finding proof of the negatives. So then you react in a way that you feel like you can't help. And so when we can start with the parent, we can ground ourselves and we can shift our own beliefs and our own thoughts first. We can only control ourselves. But when we can do that, then it makes it so much easier to be that safe place for our kids, to provide empathy and to provide that connection that our kids so desperately need.
It was one of the thoughts that this actually made me weepy when I read it. You said a lot of parents come in and they think, I am not up for this task. Like, I'm not a good enough parent, a strong enough person to be a parent to this particular child. And you say you are exactly the parent that your child needs. And I got weepy the first time I read that. And I'm wondering, what are some other thoughts that your parents are coming to you with that are not helpful? And you mentioned the catastrophizing, the all or nothing thinking. Can you give us some examples of those thoughts and ways that you help them shift?
I think that what you just said is coming in and feeling like I'm the worst parent. My kid would be better off without me or with a different parent. And that's just exacerbated if you've got a child who's adopted, or you're dealing with a foster child or a stepchild, you're somehow thinking, well, I was not meant to be this child's parent. And so that can be really debilitating and make it really hard to move forward with your child. Some of the other thoughts are, my child's being manipulative. My child's doing this on purpose. My child is just doing this to push my buttons or get under my skin. Right. And when we feel that way, when we think that way, then we see all their interactions as this push against us, as this struggle, this power struggle, as, we're told to watch out for. And so we enter with a guard up, with this big protective piece. And so we work really hard on a couple of ways of shifting. And the very first one, the most basic way of shifting, is just realizing that what you're seeing on the outside is just that. It's just the tip of the iceberg. But there's so much more going on under the surface. And right now, you don't have to know what it is. You don't need to try to fix it. Just knowing that what is happening is a sign that something else is going on and that your child needs you. Your child is missing something, whether that's connection or sensory input or a basic need like safety, or they're missing skills, that there's something else going on. And then the other one, it's one of the most powerful ones. And I talk about it in the book, and it comes from this song by Carly Simon. She says, you probably think this song is about you. Well, I have parents saying, you probably think this meltdown is about you. But the thing is it's not. It's not about you. And we place so much meaning and we place so much just emphasis on what our kids are doing as them pushing against us, them doing it because they don't care about us, them doing it because they don't respect us. And when we do that, we're leaving no room for us to actually see their point of view or meet our children where they're at. And it's really hard to have any room in your heart to want to connect, to want to get with, down on your child's level when you feel like they're constantly against you.
Right. When you're making it about you. And again, I'm listening to this and I'm like, this is not just parenting. This is like the world. This is relationships. I remember saying that to, a therapist once, and I was like, he's so mean to me. And she's like, no, he's just mean. It's just not about you. It's about him. And I was like, oh, yeah. Anyway, so I think that is such a great distinction. It's not about you. It's about the kids. So can you tell us a little bit about the freak out timer? I want to hear about the freak out timer.
Yeah, so I think the freak out timer is a funny little tool that we created because if you've ever been in an online community, you have seen this happen. And I'm sure you've seen it in your community. I know I've seen it. And if you've ever been a parent in a community, you see oh my gosh, my kid just did this thing. It's the worst. It's terrible. And it's just like word vomit. And you're just getting all your feelings and emotions out on the piece of paper or out on the screen, but there's no resolve. There's no moving forward. There's no solution. It's just bleh. And you a lot of times feel worse than when you started. And then the whole group's energy changes too. And so the freak out timer was created as a way not to shove away those feelings. You need to feel those really rotten, nasty feelings. And sometimes you need to think that your husband is an a-hole or that your kid is manipulative and that they're a brat. That's human nature. You're going to have those thoughts because your brain's trying to protect you. So it's going to have all these thoughts and feelings and emotions. And if you shove them down, they're going to end up coming out and exploding at some point. So the freak out timer, the idea behind it is that you're setting a time and you're saying, okay, I'm going to set a timer. You ask yourself, how bad is it from scale of 1 to 10? And that immediately gets your brain into curiosity because instead of just vomiting out all these feelings and thoughts and anger, you're now thinking and saying, how bad is it? I don't know how bad this is. On what scale? Scale of 1 to 10? Well, it's not this and it is this. So I'm going to give it a 5. You're now already starting to shift into more logical thinking instead of that reactive emotional state because you can't be in fight, flight, or freeze, that reactive state, and in curiosity at the same time. So it just starts to shift your brain immediatally.
Yeah. And because otherwise you'd be like, oh my God, it's the worst. And then you're like, well, is it the worst? Out of 10? Right. Is it a 10? So
no,
maybe not.
Immediately makes you think. I mean, my son getting kicked out of school, like that one was pretty big, right? But like my son eating candy when we told him it wasn't time to eat candy, for the 10th time, probably not the worst thing. And so it helps you kind of just evaluate real fast. And then you give yourself time and space. You set a random timer on your phone and you give yourself time and space to just freak out. So if you like to yell, you yell. If you like to throw things, you throw things. If you like to just get quiet and sob, like you get quiet and sob, like you do what you do best when you're processing. But there's a timer on your phone and you're checking it randomly. And every time you check it, or have a partner who's like 5 minutes and 20 seconds, 3 minutes and 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Every time that happens, you're getting reminded and brought back to this reality of like, okay, this is not forever. This is not going to be something that lasts forever. This is just a moment while you're still allowed to have those feelings. And then at the end, when timer goes off, you can always set up more time. But you get better at this practice. Once the timer goes off, you say, okay, what's my tiny next step? What is one thing I can do that's so simple, it's impossible to fail? And that's usually step outside, get a drink of water, go to the bathroom. Like it's something so simple that you can do it. Whereas when we're catastrophizing, when we're stressing, when we're worried that the world is ending, we're trying to solve all the problems and we're thinking of 5 million steps. But if it's just, what's my tiny next step that I can do right now? Then I'll be in a headspace where I can think of the next step and the next step.
And just to be clear, the tiny next step, it's not the next step to fix my kid or
Nope.
it's just to chill my ass out.
Like, ground myself. And it might be, I'll go post in a group, I'll text a friend, but it's for you, the person who's struggling the most.
So, and if I set the timer and I'm wailing and whatever, the timer goes off, but I'm like so deep into my pity party, I don't want to leave yet. I can set the timer for more time.
Yeah, you have to ask yourself, how
Am I
much
done?
more time? Now, this works better if you have a partner, and it's why we do it in our community. And it's like, once I started watching this unfold, it was like magic. It was just, we don't have a community where there's venting. We don't have a community where there's any complaining. Someone will do #set a timer. They'll set their timer. And then in the comments, someone catches them and holds space. That's what we call it. And so they'll hold space for them. And that there's probably 30 other people just watching the thread because no one else is allowed to catch that person in the moment. It's just one person. You're held. You're not allowed to give advice to the other person. You're not allowed to say anything other than, I'm still here. I'm still listening. That's it. And so just knowing that you have someone else there is really, really powerful. It's meant to just be kind of a precursor because when you learn a new skill, when you're trying to create these new habits, so many people try to jump to the end, the end goal, and they try to create the routines and the systems and all this, but they haven't created the foundation. And I know you are all about that. But when you're still building that foundation, it feels like you're not moving. It feels like you're not making progress. So you need a process where you can manage those emotions when you're like, oh man, I messed up again. And then you start getting really mad at yourself. Set a freak out timer.
Oh, that's so good. Because one of the questions I want to ask you is you say in your book, it's normal to try these calming techniques and still lose your ever-loving mind. I thought that was awesome. And it takes time to rewire your mind and it takes time to create new habits. So I'm wondering, Dayna, how do you help your community deal with that time lag? Because that is so frustrating when you're doing all the work and the habit is still not coming naturally and you're not seeing results from it and you don't think you ever will. How do you coach people through the time lag?
I think that's why one of the very first plans that we create, that ride the storm plan, which I would just equate that kind of like to your tornado plan. Like if I grew up in Tornado Alley, so it's like, here's a storm, we go to the basement, we wait it out. So you're not solving anything, you're not fixing anything. And when you're in that stage, it doesn't feel like you're making a lot of progress. And so the piece of the puzzle of that plan that I teach right up front is how to start celebrating really small wins. And so we start looking for progress, not perfection. We start looking for proof of the opposite. We start looking for small growth. So let's say my kid used to melt down for 3 hours at a time, and now they're melting down for 30 minutes and they're going to their room by themselves, right? That's a huge win. So I've got to focus on that and focus on that gain instead of focusing on, well, he's still having meltdowns, he's still hitting. And so by really celebrating that right at the beginning and creating a habit, it's one of the first habits we want you to create, is this habit of every single day, like, what was a win I could celebrate today? Even if it's just, I lost my shit and then I reconnected afterwards.
Right.
That's better than I lost my cool and then we just derailed for 3 days. So celebrating those really small pieces is one of the ways to handle that lag from, I have this goal, I have this intention, and it's how you stay committed when you're not seeing the results yet.
I love it. And when you said finding proof of the opposite, I thought you gave so many great examples in the book. Like when parents are like, oh, my kid, I don't know, whatever, like my kid doesn't like me or something like that. I'd be like, well, actually, he came to you and asked you to read him a book. Or my kids are always fighting. Well, not really, because they did have that one moment. So you have to keep training yourself to find those things. It's so good.
Absolutely.
And I know, Dayna, some people are going to listen to this and they're like, okay, oh God, I just don't have the time and energy for this, and I'm sure so many of your parents come to you like beyond exhausted, beyond depleted. So can you tell us a little bit about the 5-minute energy plan?
Yeah. 5-minute energy plan is one of my favorite things. We didn't used to teach this actually. And funny story. Can I tell a funny story?
Please.
It's like, it's off. If it's off, I'm going to get back to the 5-minute energy plan, but I still tell people this story. In 2019, I don't know if you remember this, I sat next to you when your book was coming out. And I was like, I don't get it. How do you put your book in, or how do you put your method in a book? And you were like, because I know it effing works. And you were so confident. You were so darn confident. I was like, I don't know that I know my this method works without me or a coach. And we didn't used to have this you piece in 2019, and we didn't used to have this 5-minute energy plan. And once these two got added, people were able to make this progress by following the step-by-step roadmap that we laid out. And they were able to do it without me right there by them and by their side. So this 5-minute energy plan, the way that it came up is, it was after 2019 when I met you, and I was like, okay, I know this works. I've seen the results, but where are people who are making the most progress, the fastest progress? And they're not necessarily the ones that are coming to coaching calls. So they're not necessarily the ones that are getting the most help in the group, but they're just making really fast progress. What are their habits is what I wanted to know. What are they doing that's making a difference? And it came down to these 5 habits that have become our 5-minute energy plan. And they would stop and they would shift every day. So we had these thought monster cards. So we were talking about swapping thoughts. So they would pull 2 thought monster cards. They would pull a thought monster like always and never beast. And then they would pull fact finder Freddy. And they'd pull that in the morning and they'd go, okay, all day today, I'm going to focus on checking where I'm saying always and never. And I'm going to use fact finder Freddy to find proof of the opposite. So they were just shifting, right?
Love it.
So they would do that. And if they didn't do that, they'd pull an affirmation card. And it would say, I'm not a perfect mom, but I'm the mom my kid needs. Something like that, right? One bad day doesn't make me a bad parent. Something like that. They'd pull it and they'd keep that as their shift for the day. Then the next thing they do is they would prioritize their day. They would say, if I did nothing else today except for one thing, what's going to make me feel like I'm making forward progress? And so they would pick their one thing that they were going to do for the day. So this is all just taking 1 minute. You can see each of these are just taking 1 little minute. So then the next thing they did is they were connectors in the group. They were the ones that would post a coffee chat in the group and then have everybody post pictures of the drink they were drinking for the day. They were the ones who would post an accountability thread. They were the ones that were sending funny GIFs or memes in the group, but they connected with someone, and it only took less than a minute, right? Just a few seconds to connect with someone. Then the third thing that they did is they were always doing one tiny thing for themselves that boosted their energy. So they were really good at using the framework that we teach for understanding our kids on themselves. So they were looking at what boosts my energy. So is it drinking water? Is it standing outside in the sun? Is it listening to music? And what is something that drains me that I can remove? And so every day they would just kind of resettle in that intention of, I'm going to do one thing that makes me feel good today. And then the last thing that they would do is they were really good at doing habits. And so we had this one little challenge one time, like probably when I started your group, of moving more today than we moved the day before. And so these were people who every day they moved once a day, one tiny movement. They did one more sit up. They walked the stairs a little bit more. They did a dance party with their kids. They did something to take care of their body. And those 5 habits made such a difference in their time and energy that they were able to weather the storms, that they were able to have a positive mindset, that they were able to get through the really challenging moments. And then that 5 minutes started expanding into much more time. But it all started with just like that 5 minutes.
Do you find that your parents are ever resistant to this idea of taking care of themselves first before their kids?
Oh my God. Heck yes. Everybody wants to skip this one. They're like,
Yeah.
I don't need this. I don't need work on myself. I came here for my kid. And we believe in this so much that, we go really deep in this one because I can get like super fired up over this. We want our kids to believe in themselves. We want our kids to love themselves. We want our kids to advocate for themselves. But if we don't love ourselves, take care of ourselves, or empower ourselves, how can we give that skill to our kids? Mm-hmm. Right? And like one thing, the other day I was on with a coaching client and I was like, you know what? I have a question. Would you ever go to bed without plugging up your phone? And she was like, no, I always plug it up. I'm like, okay, how much battery does it have in the morning? She goes, 100%. I said, would you ever start your day without a full battery on your phone? She goes, nope. And I said, then why would you do that for yourself?
Yeah.
Why would you start your day with no battery? But yet we do it day in and day out as parents. And then we get mad at ourselves when we can't remain calm. So overwhelmed, so tired, so drained that we can't stay calm, that we can't show up for our kids the way we want to. So I think this is one of the number one things that we can do to have a better relationship with anyone in our life is be able to take care of ourselves just a little bit.
100%, and it's so true that whatever we do, our kids are going to model it, like 100%. If you say to your kids, like, don't swear, it's very bad to swear, but they hear you on the phone talking to whoever and you're just swearing, are they going to swear when they grow up? Absolutely. Whereas, and if you're like, kids, it's really important that you go to your swim lessons and go to your dance class or whatever, but they see that what parents do is sit around and watch TV or whatever, they're going to think that, exercising is kid stuff. So it's 100%. If you don't take care of yourselves, you are just paving the road for your kids as they grow into adults.
Yeah. And it's kind of doom or gloom, but if we don't take care of ourselves, who is left to take care of our kids?
Yeah.
I mean, I learned that lesson when I lost my mom. It was so clear. Like my mom she didn't care for herself. She didn't take care of herself. And my mom left this planet at a young age. And it was so clear to me at that moment. Like, I want to be here for my kids. I want to be able to be here for my grandkids. I want to be able to be here and enjoy life far beyond after my kids leave my house at 18. And I can't wait until they're 18 to start taking care of myself.
Yeah, I think you're so right on that. You mentioned you want to be there for your kids. I mean, obviously in the future and right now. And in the book, you mentioned you quit your job to help your son. And in my family, my husband did the same thing. And so obviously this is not an option for like the vast majority of families. So what do you think would have to change with our society so that this doesn't need to become a full-time occupation for a parent?
Ooh, that is a really loaded question. I think a lot.
If you could just redesign society for us, Dayna, that'd be great.
I mean, I believe so strongly in the framework that I share in the book that I do believe it is a framework for changing society, because I believe if because the framework is 4 core pieces. It's being the one person for your kid who is the safe place, the grounded person, the person who sees your kid for who they are.
Mm-hmm.
It's connecting and accepting the person in front of you for who they are, not for who you want them to be. It's understanding them and their concerns and their point of view, even if you don't agree with them, but understanding that what they're doing comes from a certain place. And then empowering both you and the other person with a plan that works for both of you. If you have that framework and you interact with every human in life with that framework, this world would be a different place. If our kids had that framework in classrooms and teachers knew, hey, they're not doing their schoolwork. They're not doing that because they're lazy. Mm-hmm. They're not doing that because they're manipulative. They're not doing that because their parents don't care about them. If we removed that blame, that shame, if we started to really see people for who they are instead of trying to fit them in this little box, then I do believe that our world would change drastically. Mm-hmm. And I think it starts in one home, and then it starts when our kids then learn this. They take it into their classrooms. I mean, we've had kids, this is what's so beautiful, is we've had kids who, they were getting kicked out of school. They were having like 50 to 60 aggressive meltdowns at school in a week. And then within a short amount of time, they're the ones on the playground solving the problems when there's a fight on the play structure. And the teachers are like, wait, I don't understand what just happened. They just created a whole little class meeting, heard everybody's concerns, and then advocated for the kids in the class to say, this is what I think we need to do to solve the problem.
Wow.
It's powerful stuff. You're teaching life skills here. And I think if we can kind of get rid of, if we go back to that thing we talked about at the beginning of these traditional parenting paradigms, this idea that we all have to fit in a box, that we all have to do things the same way. Like you and I, we work online, we do these really cool things. This didn't exist when you and I were growing up.
Yeah.
So when we realize that and we stop trying to put everyone in this very boxed in approach to life, and we start looking at, but how? What are the possibilities? Can we have a hybrid? Can we, for school, can they go half day and then do online for the other half? Can they do just a couple of classes? There's so many options, but we have to be willing to think outside the box.
Yeah. At one point you mentioned the book you used to teach inner city schools with as many as 48 students in your class.
In kindergarten.
That to me blows my mind.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, to what degree do you think that some of these behavioral problems might be the result of systemic failures with things like overcrowded schools versus individual students being bad?
Oh, I don't believe that any children are bad. And I taught in inner city Chicago, right? There are bad behaviors. There are behaviors that are hurtful and harmful. There are parents who are neglectful, but a parent listening to this, that's not going to be the parent that's neglectful, right? That's the parent who cares about their kid, who wants the best for their kid, who wants the best for, the future. And I think that it's this one size fits all approach, and it's making assumptions. It's looking at the surface level and saying, well, we have kids who are failing, so that must mean we need to teach reading more. No, why are we failing reading? Probably because they don't have food, right? And probably because they're not able to sleep in a safe place, probably because they're not taken care of at such a deeper level. They don't feel safe. And if they don't feel safe, then they're not going to learn, and they're not going to be able to treat others kindly, because it's all going to be a protective mechanism. And so there is so much, and this is really deep rooted. We could go for a long time on this. I think, this is something, a lot of the parenting strategies that are being taught even today, they come from a place, and even in education, they come from a place of us needing to create factory workers and soldiers. And we're not in that world anymore. And so we have to start thinking differently for our kids. We have to start thinking differently for our communities so that we are more accepting of the differences that are around us.
Mm-hmm. You know what? I have this really strong memory of standing in the playground with a bunch of other parents, and we were looking at all of our kids playing, and we were all talking about the different diagnoses that we had just received for our kids and trying to manage the system and get the appropriate assessments. And so most of us, learning disabilities, neurodiversity. And then I had a moment of being like, wait, is anyone's kid here like normal? Or like, do we know of any normal kids in the and there was one normal kid in the class. And I was like, well, is normal maybe shifting?
Yeah. Well, the whole concept of neurodiversity is that we all are different. We all have different wirings. We all have different neurotypes, different sensory preferences, different ways of thinking about things, just like we have different learning styles and we have different likes and dislikes. It's not just learning style. It's all of us as a human. And so we have to start looking at this as individualized, both in school and stop looking at it as deficits and things to fix. And, I've been down the road of diagnoses. People in our world are always looking at, well, I wonder what diagnosis this needs to be. And the problem is with a diagnosis, you get no roadmap, you get no plan. You might get a little more understanding of what's going on. And it feels good to be like, okay, there's others out there that are like this, right? But at the same time, there are so many kids that will never get a diagnosis. My daughter will probably never get a diagnosis because she quote unquote fits in. She is a star student. She is a great friend. She is so sweet, so loving. And so because there aren't those outward behavior problems and because she's a straight A student, she'll probably never get a diagnosis, but she has debilitating anxiety. She has really strong sensory preferences. She is so empathic. Like she feels everybody's feelings and emotions. And you have to parent her differently. You have to teach her differently. And so we have to start looking at all individuals that way and saying, okay, what makes you you, and how can I create an environment that you can thrive in?
At one point in your book, you say a diagnosis isn't a reason behind a behavior. And I read that and I was like, ooh, I think that might trigger some people. Tell us a little bit more why a diagnosis isn't a reason behind a behavior.
Because the behavior you're seeing on a diagnosis is a set of bullet points, basically, that a bunch of psychologists have come together and said, okay, this grouping of characteristics is this diagnosis, right? That's what a diagnosis is. There are many diagnoses that haven't even made it in what's called the DSM-5, which is what makes a diagnosis that you can get in a school system even and get services for. And so the diagnosis is an understanding. It's a grouping, but again, it's still a box you're putting a kid in or a person into. But the reason behind the behavior isn't because they're autistic, isn't because they're ADHD, isn't because of this. Like I'm an ADHD adult, so I'll use me as an example, right? I am not disorganized because of my ADHD, right? I am disorganized because it's the way my brain operates. Like I have ADHD, I am ADHD, and me being disorganized is the flip side of my superpower, which is also my creativity and my constant thinking and overactive brain. And you can't have one without the other. And so when we think of a diagnosis as something to fix, we're getting rid of the very thing that also can help our kids thrive. And when we're looking for diagnosis being the reason, then we're not really looking at the need that isn't being met. So in the book, I talk about 6 core needs. The first one being basic needs. If you are hungry, thirsty, tired, you're going to be hangry, you're going to be snippy, you're going to have trouble like staying calm and regulated and paying attention. And the safety piece is a big one. And that is part of a basic need, is to feel safe psychologically, emotionally. And so you're going to see outward behaviors if we don't feel connected or we don't feel like we belong. And right now in our world, in our society, it's like you belong in this group or you belong in this group. And it's very polarizing.
Yeah.
And when you don't feel like you belong, you're going to act out. There's going to be behaviors. And so, and I could keep going further and I go further in the book, but the point here is that the diagnosis is just this set of characteristics. But the fact that you want me to fit in and you don't see me as who I am, like I speak differently or I think differently, that makes me feel really isolated. I'm going to act out because I feel isolated, not because I have ADHD.
Thank you for that distinction. It strikes me that as there's so much diversity in kids, there's equal diversity in parents. And I wonder if we need to expand our idea of what a good parent is and what good parenting is.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I think there's a lot of judgment, and I think there's a lot of, you're either a good parent or a bad parent. You're either a good kid or a bad kid. And I think every single person is doing the best with what they've got and the experiences they've had leading up to where they are. And that is really controversial. And I know there are quote unquote bad people in this world. I still think they do what they do because of, I think if you took those 6 basic needs, right, those 6 things, you're going to see that they either didn't feel safe. So they were looking for control or power or something that made them feel safe. They were looking for belonging. They were looking to settle some sort of like physical sensory need. They lacked the skills, or they had this just innate desire, this like pull to do this thing or to get this thing. And so I think if we look at all of, even, this is, like I said, very controversial. I've had lots of arguments with even people like that I know very closely. You'll find that those needs weren't met as a child. And as they grew up, I don't think that they were born bad. I don't think that they are bad. I think that they don't have their needs met in a certain way. And so I think that's what it comes down to, is looking at the world is a good place, but the world is not understanding yet, right? We're having to learn how to be more accepting. We're having to learn how to understand people more, be more in tune with other people's needs, and how to not take everything so personally, going back to the beginning, and that
doesn't mean accepting bad behavior.
No, it doesn't mean that it's okay for someone to hit me. It doesn't mean it's okay for someone to steal my car. That's not what I'm saying. But we have to look at it differently instead of just saying, that's bad, let's punish it.
Yeah.
Because that's not working for us. Mm-hmm. So what else can we do?
Dayna, any final thoughts you'd want to say to any parents who are listening and thinking, oh my gosh, what's wrong with my kid? What do I do next? I can't handle this anymore. I'm too tired from my work. I'm sure that's basically the state that people come to you in.
Yeah. I mean, I would go back to something you pointed out right at the beginning. If you're listening to this and you feel like either it's too late, I've messed up my kid, or there's so much going on, I can't ever get ahead of this. I want you to know you are exactly the parent your kid needs, and you're not failing. Most likely you haven't had a clear roadmap to follow. You haven't had a framework that simplifies things so that it's not so overwhelming. And you haven't had a community that gets you, that understands you. And you're not alone. I mean, when I started this, I started my blog kind of sharing all the ups and downs, and I wanted to find one other human who was as quote unquote messed up as I was. Mm. And I didn't find one. I found millions of us who are struggling to raise our kids, to feel confident, to empower our kids and empower ourselves. And then, the last thing is that our kids aren't broken. There is nothing wrong with your kid. Your kid is exactly who they were designed to be. And all they need is one person. And by listening to this, you are that one person who can see them for who they are, who can teach them the skills they need, and who can create an environment that they can thrive in.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to get all weepy again. Thank you for that, Dayna. I know people are going to want so much more of what you have to give. Can you tell everybody about your awesome new book and your podcast and all of the good stuff? Tell them where they can stay in contact.
Yeah, so you can go to calmthechaosbook.com. We've got a starter kit that's going to help you actually take the book and implement it so it won't just sit on your shelf. and you won't, you just read it, but it turns that knowing into doing. And then we also have a 7 days to less chaos course that you get when you purchase the book. So lots of goodies when you go over there to calmthechaosbook.com, order the book, and then you can go to calmthechaospodcast.com and you can also check out any of our podcasts. And we walk you through the different concepts in the book, the different stages of going from surviving to thriving as a parent, and our framework as well. And we apply that framework to different challenging situations.
Amazing. Dude, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Thank you for being a friend to me when I needed you, when I was experiencing chaos in my family, and for all the wisdom that you give. I know so many parents who have been impacted by your work, and I'm really appreciative.
Well, thank you so much. This has been an absolute joy. And thanks for digging deep with the questions. You really made me kind of think deeply. So
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, my friend. Talk to you soon. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Hey, dude, thanks for listening. If you like this episode, make sure you're subscribed so you can get the next one. And by the way, if you rate and review this podcast, it really helps me get found by other people who need some goals, grit, and some woo-woo shit. And be sure to connect and DM me at Una Duncan on Instagram and let me know what you thought of the episode. Chat soon.